Welcome to the Writers Are People Too podcast, where you might just find that you shouldn't meet the writer of your heroes. Tonight we have with us Eva Sandor. So, Eva, go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself and be careful what you say because this is going on the internet.
Oh my goodness. And everybody knows that the internet is filled with nothing but the absolute truth, right? So we've
Absolutely.
got to be very, very careful what goes on the internet. Well, I like to say I am an illustrator turned author, Eva Sandor, and I like to say that I write a series of mildly magical novels that are comedy with a serious soul.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so just before this, you mentioned that you started in copywriting. I have to ask, what made you decide to leave that probably soul-sucking profession and get into fiction?
Well, it really wasn't horribly soul sucking because everything, when you're a creative person, I'm an illustrator as well as a copywriter. So it's always a matter of someone wants you to do a thing and you have to do it and you have to bring quality to it. And that means putting your soul in it and finding the thing about it that's enjoyable and worthy of putting your best in. So it wasn't soul sucking, but at the same time, there's always this wish that you can just write whatever you want, right? Someday, just write
Yeah,
whatever you want. And I am a huge, huge fan of Patrick O'Brian. I don't know if you know Patrick
I
O'Brian,
don't know.
the author of the Master and Commander series. So there's
Okay.
21 of these books, 20 finished books, one that he didn't quite finish. And they are a fantastic, magnificent portrait of the entirety of life in the 19th century. And the language in them is something fantastic. It is so rich and it's so delicious to those of us who love O'Brien and we love to read it. And it's just anything he says is just like eating a meal. It's so amazing. So I used to chat on the O'Brien fan groups on Facebook and that sort of thing. And I'd write some, kind of pastiches, some funny stuff, put in his style. And it struck me that I would like to keep on writing. I'd like to write something longer and something a little bit more, fulfilled, like with a story, an actual story to it. And I started doing that. And of course, I put in my own kind of juicy language, which, a lot of people do enjoy. And it ended up becoming this book, the first book, Fool's Proof. So this got this stripe across here because this was a proof copy. But this is the second round of covers. My first round of covers, I designed the covers too. Um, it was like the Bayeux Tapestry. It was like meant to be kind of a fun mock medieval thing. But I find these look better at a small size, at thumbnail size, because that's how people, look at books
Mhm.
today on
And
Amazon.
you mentioned you're an illustrator. Did you design and create those covers yourself?
Yes. And the interiors and every bit of my marketing and every other thing, because that's what creatives do. We make
Well,
stuff.
yeah. Well, I guess now's a perfect time to ask. Published
Mhm.
traditionally or self?
It was self. It's indie
Okay.
publishing. And originally, I really did make the effort, and I was getting set on the traditional publishing route. I went to the Midwest Writers Workshop, which is a wonderful place to meet people in publishing and learn all about what it's going to take for you to get out there, make the queries, get the agent, go through the long process. And I did that. But at that time, self publishing, indie publishing was kind of arduous. There weren't a lot of tools for it. Traditional publishing seemed like the thing. But then the pandemic hit. And after my novel had been shoved under the bed for quite some time, I kind of discovered that indie publishing had changed in the meantime. So during that time when everyone was looking for a project, I found that there were a lot of tools that would help us do indie publishing better than it used to be. And also that traditional publishers, unless you're a really big, big name, chances are they're going to ask you to do a lot of your own marketing yourself. And because I'm a do-it-yourselfer and I like to learn things and make it happen all alone, I decided, you know what? As much work as it is to find an agent, I'm going to put in that work and learn how to publish books myself because I can do my own books and then I can maybe help my friends later if they write books, which I keep encouraging them to write books. My husband wrote a book. I helped him out with that. But yes, it has been fascinating. It's just been incredible. It would
So
be,
what are the
yeah.
ups and the downs, the highs and the lows of self-publishing then?
Well, I would say that the high and the low is the same thing, and that is that you have to do it yourself. And so, yes, if you're a do-it-yourselfer person and you dig that and that is your thing, baby, well, then you're in heaven with it, because you can do whatever you like, for the good or the bad. You can make a terrible mistake all on your own, or you can be a great success all on your own. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to make it work. But at the same time, if you are the kind of person who would rather just focus on writing and you need some hand holding and you want someone to walk you through the marketing world and all of that stuff, then of course traditional publishing still has its place. And the people at the Midwest Writers Workshop were wonderful. I really, really enjoyed what I learned from them. And certainly if I had gone ahead with that route, I would have met some amazing people who really, really love books and bringing them to audiences. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that I've learned from talking to so many authors on here is like, it's literally a business all wrapped in itself. Like, like you said, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, perhaps that's good, but there's going to be a lot of mistakes along the way, I'm sure.
Yeah, there sure are. There's a ton of mistakes that come with not knowing how the different advertising platforms work, and not understanding where your audience is. Slowly, little by little, I'm dialing my way into that, because, it was tough to write a bunch of books and learn all this at the same time. And so, having finished the fourth one, because this series has an arc of 4 books that makes it complete, I promised myself that this year would be the year I did not write a book, but instead focused on learning about marketing, really get down there and learn all this stuff that, that publishers know, because it's their job.
Well, once you figure everything out, I'll have you back on. You can just divulge all your secrets to me.
Oh yeah, I'll spill them all. It'd be great.
Awesome. So, The Heart of Stone Adventures. I went and I found it, and I saw one of your lines that said, "The path from jerk to hero winds through lots of funny places." So I was like, is this about me? Jerk to hero? Okay.
Is that what happened to you?
I'm
Yeah.
just a jerk sometimes, and I'm learning it bettering myself, as
Who's
I'm sure my
not?
wife would attest to. So give me a brief synopsis of this.
Okay, so the main character was once the royal jester. He got booted to the curb for a slight overuse of sass, as I put it, and he finds himself for the first time in his life, dirt poor, out on the street, on the mainland, because the royal island is an island, so he's far from home. Nobody's going to watch his back except for a sassy talking magpie who decides that the human being, is his pet. And so Fred's out there. His name is Malfred Murd, Fred for short. He's out there trying to jingle out a living on the streets, busking, doing his best. He's really a quality entertainer, but, he tends to be a little bit abrasive. He sometimes rubs people the wrong way. And he ends up getting chased into a land which is technologically advanced. And it's a wonderful country, but unfortunately, the royals do not think so. So this country has been in royal disfavor for the past 3 generations due to something that happened earlier. I won't go into it. But at this time, the ruler of this country is getting set to make a plea to the king to have her family's title continue, so that they can continue making their country prosperous. And the reason the country is prosperous is because of that heart of stone. It's a magical mountain that turns, and it gives motive power to this country, and it makes them extremely economically advanced. If only they could join the rest of the kingdom and not be shunned. Well, things go really, really wrong. And Fred gets really, really mixed up into what I call a rescue mission gone horrifically, hilariously wrong.
Okay, awesome.
That's that.
So yeah, you've mentioned a few times this humor. And so I was very intrigued by it when I saw that you were writing a comedy fantasy. So that's not a genre I've read before, but what made you decide that you wanted to go into a comedy fantasy as opposed to just a fantasy?
Well, I love comedy. I just like to laugh. I try to see the good side of this world, because if you didn't, there's so much there's so much to find that's bad. So it takes more skill, I think, to find the good, to find the humor. That doesn't mean that it's all silliness, because as Terry Pratchett put it, you can't just string a joke through an entire book. It has to have a little tragic relief, as he said. So there are very serious things in my books. There is really heart. There are things which aren't funny at all, in fact. But I think a lot of the humor comes from the situations. It comes from my language. It comes from the fact that sometimes the characters can't face what's serious, and I choose instead to kind of turn the mind's eye toward what's ridiculous or what's absurd. But in the end, it's not just bonkers laughs a minute. I like to think it's the kind of humor that maybe we remember from MASH, if people remember that kind of dramedy humor.
So I know what it is, but I've never
Mhm.
seen an episode.
Oh, okay. Or another one that comes to mind, I just recently binge watched Better Call Saul. Have you seen that?
I haven't, but my wife is familiar with it.
Yeah, it's that sort of serious humor, it's
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And the reason that I chose fantasy was just because I wanted the complete free reign to invent a world, because I thought, oh, I like things to be real. Like, I don't like to write a bunch of BS. I like to know what I'm writing about and have it be real. So I thought, better just do fantasy, because that way I won't have to research every single thing that I put in. Well, of course, that turned out not to be true at all. I
Yeah.
can't not. So, in the course of writing these books, I have spoken to and picked the brains of a gentleman from the CIA, a moth expert, someone from the Carnegie Endowment for World Peace, a ship's captain, a tugboat captain, people who are involved in ox driving, the group. All Things Oxen on Facebook. You didn't know this, but there are tons of people who are involved in training oxen today.
Wow.
So I just meet the most amazing and wonderful people while I'm writing and researching these things. And yeah, it was fantasy so that I could have more leeway. But in the end, I ended up learning just as much about the real world as if I had written a real book.
So, what do you use to elicit the laughs from people? Is it mostly situational, or is it wordplay, or is it crass? Like, give me a couple examples.
It's often wordplay. It's often the people have always said they just think the way I say things is funny. Like, the way I choose to put a thing is often funny. Like, when someone's there, I have a character who's drunk. He falls under a table, and I describe a tiny voice that came from somewhere far behind his face, that tells him that something's real. Just little things like that. It's so many of them, and it's just so much absorbed into the way I write it. The way Patrick O'Brien has his way of talking, I kind of have my way of putting things. So um, it's I want to say another one that's very, very old, stories of Fritz Lieber. Have you ever read the Fritz Lieber
I have
stories?
not. No, you're giving me a huge list of homework, though.
Okay. Well, I'm just getting started on them myself. My husband was a huge, huge fan, and he is one of the all-time classic greats of science fiction and fantasy. And he invented a pair of characters and a land, a country, and a city that they live in, which inspired just generations of other writers. So they inspired J.R.R. Martin, they inspired Michael Moorcock, they inspired all of these wonderful things. And there's a land and city that the characters move around in called Lankmar. And some people say, that mood of that grimy city that has so many little crannies and has so many little secrets, and such a personality all its own. That is the sort of mood that my world, I hope, evokes to people.
Hmm. Now, do you do much world building in this, or is this mostly about the character and the situations that he's in?
The world gets built because of what happens to the characters. So it's not described at all for its own sake. That world that I just talked about, which is so richly crafted, which a lot of people do enjoy so much, arises from the characters and the situations that they're in little by little. Kind of like the way Springfield arises in The Simpsons. They didn't make an effort to get out there and build a whole city, but poof, somehow over the years, there it is.
Yeah. That's something that I've also found talking to a lot of authors is I'm really curious about world building because I love rich worlds.
Mhm.
And it's oftentimes boring for a reader if you just say, here's 10 pages about my world. Nobody
Yeah,
cares about that. People love the characters. And so, like you said, you want to learn about the world through what's going on within the characters' lives. I think that's super wise. Um,
exactly.
and,
It
and
has
this
to be fun.
bird that you have, I'm sorry, what was that?
I say it has to be fun. It has to be entertaining
Yeah.
for the readers. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this bird you have, you said it was a magpie.
hmm
Is he the serious relief or more of the comedy side?
He is not a comedy character in that he is not ridiculous in any way. He is, in fact, a noble of his people. He is very. He's young, it's true, but he's an adventurous sort, and he really wants to do his best by his pet human. The magpies call humans human beings, and they feel that they really are so very much like people. They utter cries that are so very much like language, and with their busy, meaty ape fingers, they're always getting up to something. So Corvinalius has his pet human, yeah, and he really wants to do right by him. So he has a different viewpoint, though, because his perceptions are different, his people are different, his assessment of the situation is different. He's always trying to help Fred, but you know how it is. He can't quite pull that off because there wouldn't be any fun if he did. But I've had a lot of readers actually from Australia. The magpie that I imagined in this book is a European magpie, but as I understand it, the Australian magpie is quite a character too. And so maybe because Corvinalius, that's his name, is a fantasy magpie, he might have a little bit of both.
Okay. Did you want to read an excerpt today?
Oh, yeah, I guess I could. I could start. I'll start from the first book just because otherwise spoilers. But I could say, let me start from the very beginning. I'll read you just this very short intro here and see if that's good enough
Perfect.
for starters. Okay. Human beings, also known as human, abbreviated men, are bipedal, but lack feathers, beaks, or the power of flight. Human beings possess a rudimentary yet serviceable spoken language, grammatically similar to our own and thus not difficult for any enthusiastic pet keeper to learn. In addition, certain male human are able to utilize a system of notation which bears a surprising resemblance to our scratch marking. The social organization of human beings also mirrors our own. The best studied human, those whose large sandstone hive is to be found near our noble stronghold, appear to have their own version of a royal family, court, peasants, and so forth. Indeed, scratches the eminent scholar Colo the elder, if imitation be flattery, men have praised magpie kind since the dawn of days. Colo the younger, a hatchling's guide to animals.
I love that. I love how
Thank
right away
you.
you're putting it through the viewpoint of the magpies and how humans are a lesser species, of course, trying to emulate us. I love that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of teachers use humor as a method of education. It keeps people on their toes. They pay more close attention to what you're saying because of this. And you mentioned that there are deeper themes in your book. So what are some of the deeper themes, perhaps, or messages that you're trying to get across?
Well, believe it or not, I think I am trying to get across a message of stoic virtue. And whether that's spelled out or not, the characters I think who are the best to look up to exemplify that. I have characters who are striving to do what's right, even when things go really, really wrong. And sometimes they do it in ways that are ridiculous and that lead them into trouble. But other times they do this in ways that I think really are deeply touching. There are moments in there that I hope that, I've heard wonderful reports that people do understand, and that they feel the feelings that are there, not just the humor, but also the life lessons.
Awesome. So there were a couple other things that you said you wanted to chat about. You said that you have some unique methods for editing and ideation. And you mentioned StoryGrid. So what is StoryGrid?
Yeah, these, I'm not sure how unique they are because I'm hoping that more and more people join this method. This has been really, really snowballing a lot. There's a small group on Reddit for StoryGrid, but the StoryGrid outside Reddit is huge. You can look it up. And then the other one that I really enjoy is Dramatica, and Dramatica is a little bit different. So I'll start with the StoryGrid method. The StoryGrid is a fantastic way of, they bill it as a CAT scan for your story, because what you do is you take your story scene by scene and you analyze it in really excellent detail, looking for turn points, looking for always, they have what they call the core ideas. of each genre. So as you build the story and you put it underneath this lens and you examine all the parts of it, what you do end up creating is a spreadsheet where you can identify exactly what is going on with the story. So when people say, oh, it's kind of smushy in the middle, you can look at this StoryGrid spreadsheet and say, oh, I'm sorry, that's because I don't have a turn point in scenes 55 and 56. Or you can say, oh, it's because the last 3 scenes have had the same word count. Or you can say it's because the value shift, which is one of the things that we look for in the StoryGrid. There's a value shift from one value to another, like for instance, from truth to falsehood or from hope to despair. And if your value shift is the same scene after scene after scene, it bores people. These are the kinds of nitty-gritty analysis that you can do with the StoryGrid. And in the end, what you have is a really, really actionable developmental edit. This is an example of how I do the StoryGrid. Inside, I create pages for each scene. These are several books in here. And then I go through it, and I also have, let me see if I can find the example of the StoryGrid itself when it folds out. One of these. So this is an analysis of the entire story, scene by scene, with the analyses. Yeah, so this stuff is not by accident. It doesn't come about just from a hunch, from a wing and a prayer. It is the product of careful, careful work. The other one that I like is Dramatica, and Dramatica is very popular with screenwriters, and it's not so much an editing method as it is an ideation method. They have this hypothesis that they put forward that a correctly crafted story behaves as though it were a human mind examining a certain specific problem from all possible angles. And they said that if you fail to examine the story from all of these possible angles, audiences will sense that. They'll sense that something's missing. They'll be like, I don't know, it wasn't quite, but if you get it right, and an example of very archetypal and very, very simple one that gets it right is the original Star Wars. It's call it hackneyed, call it that it came from a million samurai movies and a million, Buck Rogers movies, but it gets it. It has the story. It's very, very full. It's very complete. And you can create stories that are much more complex with Dramatica, although they may or may not succeed in this way. As a matter of fact, they have a group that analyzes famous movies, and they go through each one in extremely excruciating detail, and some real greats are actually not considered complete stories by Dramatica, even though they're very well written and loved. But the idea of Dramatica is that it walks you through a series of extremely focused questions that you probably would never have thought to ask if it weren't for Dramatica. And as you answer each one, it winnows the story down into what's known as a story form. And the story form has all the spots where you need to pay attention, make sure that you steer the story correctly in these moments to avoid failed story. They call that a tail. And in the end, what you have is a really powerful roadmap so that as you write, you'll have a plan of where you're going. And when you come to those moments that you don't know how to proceed, you don't know which point of view to take, or you don't know which part of your message you want to emphasize, you have this plan that guides it all in the same path and keeps it all working together so that you don't contradict yourself or run off on tangents.
Yeah, I love the almost scientific method of making a good story. So I'm going to have to check those out. But I hope that art does not get lost in the midst of this scientific method. So how would you say that each story can be kept unique, or the artist's spark can be kept across all these different stories, even if you're using the scientific method?
The artist's spark is in the artists themselves. You put it there. It comes from you. So as an illustrator, for example, like somebody tells you what you have to do. They tell you how all the parameters of it. They tell you a deadline, and you agree. You're like, okay, by next Thursday, I will have drawn you a picture of a gorilla handing a parking ticket to a judge, that kind of thing. Like, you will do that. And you somehow still have to keep it alive. And that's the execution. So ideas are everywhere, and they cannot be tamed. You can't copyright an idea, you can't grab it. But what you can have for your own is your execution. And that comes out of your habits, that comes out of your specific word choices. It comes also out of your personality, out of your own joy and your own characteristics. So if it starts feeling wooden, if it starts feeling as though you're just going through the robot motions, then that means that you need to find yourself again in it, and find the joy in writing for yourself, or drawing, or whatever it is you do creatively, music.
Yeah, absolutely. So just outline for me real quick. Let's pretend that your book took 1 year to write. Mm-hmm. How long would it take you then to use StoryGrid and Dramatica to analyze your story? Is that another 50%? Is that just 10%? Like, what does that look like?
The first time you do it, it's going to take longer because you have to get used to it and you have to learn it. And Dramatica in particular is like TV tropes. Like, you could get lost in Dramatica and never, ever write another word again because you could just be like doing the tools. But for me, the writing of the draft itself takes 6 to 8 months. And then I set aside, I want to do 1 scene per day. So probably will take about 6 weeks for the story grid and all of its associated editings. But I actually am able to go faster now that I've kind of become used to it, and I make this whole entire writing project StoryGrid and Dramatica friendly from the start. But I would say the first month of writing, I use Dramatica to really hash out all of those basics that the story is going to go around. And then for maybe a month or so, I'm just using the plot points. I'm doing the very, very basic bare bones of the arc of the story. And then it's time to just roll up the sleeves, get into it, write for a few months, and then give it about a month of the editing treatment at the end.
Okay, awesome. So you mentioned that you're set to give a talk at the American Library Association trade show in June. And it's about small-scale fantasy. So indulge me on what that will be.
Okay. Well, this talk, I'm still kind of getting together information for it, and I'm still interviewing people and wanting to ask a community that I'm carefully and slowly building on Reddit around small scale fantasy, because I have this intuition. And actually, I recently found an article, someone saying almost the same thing that I'm saying now a few years ago. I'm trying to track down this person because it was written under a username and I have no idea who it is. But I have this intuition that the recent uptick in the popularity of what is being called cozy fantasy. You've probably heard of cozy fantasy. Yes? No?
I have not, no.
You have not?
I've heard of high fantasy, but not cozy fantasy.
You will be hearing about cozy fantasy because it's the opposite. It's become extremely popular lately. As a matter of fact, in May of 2022, it exploded in popularity. You can look at the Google Ngram, how many searches or how many usages of the word cozy fantasy were out there. And almost overnight, coinciding with the foundation of Wingraph magazine, which is a short story magazine of cozy fantasy. And I'm actually going to have a chat and interview with its editor, Nathaniel Webb, tomorrow. But starting with that and the cozy fantasy subreddit, it just really, really got popular. And another part of it that really got popular was the book Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, who was a audiobook narrator. And this feeling of the cozy fantasy, my sense is that the term came from cozy mystery. And cozy mysteries are those subcategory of mysteries where there isn't much bloodshed, where it's more just a puzzle for the readers to solve, more like a clue, whodunit kind of thing. And the cozy fantasy is billed as a fantasy which has lower stakes. It's warm-hearted. It is not epic. It involves something very simple, like someone wanting to build a coffee shop for the first time in a fantasy world. That's Legends and Lattes. So that kind of thing. And on the subreddit, the Cozy Fantasy subreddit, there's actually a questionnaire of what elements you think make it cozy. And they're literally cozy elements like warmth and a fire and a cat and coffee and embroidery and things like that. But I have a sense that what people really are responding to is not so much the comfort, not so much the coziness, although many do, but they're responding to the fact that these stories are more manageably scaled. They don't involve such a giant cast of characters that you need to draw a chart of the family tree or a giant map. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of the politics and, the formation of like the 50,000 soldier armies or anything like that. What you're looking for is a story you can wrap your head around, something that's possibly following just one character through a much more small scaled quest or tale or something that they need that's human in dimension. And so I'm calling that small scale fantasy because there's a lot of argument over what is cozy. Is it cozy if someone's actually in danger? Does it literally have to be comfortable? These are questions that people discuss, and I think that they're interesting questions, and I would never think of taking away the term cozy fantasy because it's wonderful and it has a great, great mood and a great following. But I think that this idea of the smaller scaled stories time is coming back around. And I think that it's going to expand beyond just fantasy. I think we're going to see small scale other genres as well. So that's the subject of my talk.
Awesome. Yeah, that comes back to stories are character driven. People, for the most part, want to read a story about a character they can relate with. And, there's a time and a place for Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones where everything is epic and you have to make the maps and you have to look at the lineages and stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, those have already been written. I'm probably not going to compete with them on that scale. So I would rather write a story about a character that I can relate with and that my readers can relate with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people also want to come to a story like that because they're escaping from pressures in their real life, When everything's bearing down on you, in real life, the last thing you want to do is have to expend mental effort on a piece of entertainment. Am I right? So I think
Yeah.
that's what's driving it right now is comfort in a way, but it's comfort for the reader. It's an escape for them into something that is more entertaining and less taxing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, any final comments before I let you go?
No, I don't think so. It's been a really, really wonderful chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great, and I'll have to check out all that stuff and your comedy books as well. You want to show the cover one more time?
Sure. This is the first one. So in this book, Fool's Proof, this is the one where we start the story off. Please ignore the band because this is just a proof copy. But so this is the first one. The paperback has a wraparound cover if people like paperbacks. In the second book, the main character becomes an undercover cop, and it's not shown here on the cover. This is a second plot thread where Corvinelius goes on a really, really big adventure. But the character becomes an undercover officer and trying to track down a mob boss in a grimy city overflowing with secrets. Can I even say that? In the third book, I turn toward the spy thriller. So I do a kind of a spoof of the James Bond type stories. And this does, in fact, have right from the start, the beginning of this story is an overture, which you can reach with a QR code. And you can actually listen. It's not in the paperback book, but it is in the other one. You can actually listen to the theme song and watch the opening credits. They're like those kind of James Bond kind of credits with the, crazy shapes. They're shadow puppets, actually. I did this a couple of years back, and it was really cool and fun to do. Last but not least is the conclusion to the Heart of Stone adventures, in which the main character, having been an undercover officer and having been a spy, now turns toward literally world peace. How will that go? Not well. That's one thing for sure. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, everybody, Eva Sandor, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.